It's the best kept secret in climate science. You won't hear this from any paid climate scientist. You won't hear this from any media personality. You won't hear this from any government figure, because it runs counter to what we are all being told to do.
Hey there, climate warriors. Welcome to Are We Fucked? How to Survive a Climate Shit Show. I'm your host, Lisa Camillo, and today we're diving headfirst into the deep end of climate science with a true trailblazing in the field. He's not your average scientist, folks. Oh no, he's the one and only Guy McPherson, a force to be reckoned with in the world of natural resources, ecology, and evolutionary biology. Guy McPherson is here to shake things up and challenge what you believe is going to happen in the next few years. But hold on onto your hats, because Guy is not afraid to tackle the tough stuff. He's the leading authority on disrupt climate change with a theory that's as controversial as it's captivating. Brace yourselves, listeners, because we're about to dive into the heart of the matter. Term Human Extinction, which predicts human extinction by 2026. Yes, you heard very well. It's 2026. That's right, folks. Guy McPherson is the man behind the infamous doomer fringe theories that have the world buzzing. But love him or hate him, one thing's for sure, this conversation is bound to be anything but ordinary. So sit tight, buckle up, and prepare to have your mind blown by the one and only Guy McPherson. Whether you're a skeptic, or a believer, or somewhere in between, one thing's for sure. You won't want to miss a single moment of this eye-opening discussion. Hello, Professor. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
So the first question is, why are there so many people loving you and also so many people hating you? Why are you so polarizing? You seem lovely. I can't think of anybody hating you, to be honest.
When I talk about the things I talk about, the things I write about, people sometimes become scared for them or for their children or for their grandchildren. And so most people don't like to hear what I have to say. I don't even like to hear what I have to say because it's really dire information. And so some people are scared. Some people become annoyed when they get scared. They become angry. And so you're probably familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief and dying.
Yeah, the 5 stages.
Yeah. And so a lot of people are either stuck in the negotiation phase. They think there must be something I can do to extend my life and that of my partner, that of my children, that of my grandchildren. There has to be something I can do because humans are so smart, as we hear almost every day, so intelligent. So that's part of it. I think that's probably a big part of it, is that people are just afraid of the information that I'm presenting.
Absolutely. But I'm starting to question now, how close are we from dying?
The one factor over which we have no control is coming our way is an ice-free Arctic Ocean. When the Arctic Ocean loses the ice that is floating on top of it, suddenly things will heat up very, very rapidly. The first season of losing that Arctic ice, we go from white ice to an ocean nearly the color of my shirt.
Oh my God, okay. So for those who can't see his shirt, because I can see his shirt, it's very dark.
Right. So it's dark blue, right? So we're going from white to dark blue, and that changes the albedo. The albedo is reflectance.
The reflectance of the sun, right? So we're going to absorb more sun.
Yes. So the Arctic Ocean is going to transfer from being a bright white surface that reflects a lot of incoming radiation. It's going to switch from that to a very dark blue. And when it does, that just a change in reflectance alone is equivalent to 25 tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Okay, that's not fun. One thing I want to ask you, why is turning the ocean that dark?
Well, ice and snow are white. The ocean is not. So it's just that the natural cover of the ocean throughout the world is dark blue. So you can't change a system from one color to another, especially when we're talking about something as important as radiative heating or albedo or reflectance. You can't change that so rapidly. This was predicted, by the way, to occur by 2 renowned professors, Jennifer McKinnon at the University of California, San Diego, and James Anderson at Harvard. He's a professor of atmospheric sciences, and he predicted that this would happen last year.
So it wasn't like Joe the mechanic saying this, basically.
No, no. And Jennifer McKinnon, the professor at University of California, San Diego, said it would happen year before last.
So it was supposed to already been happening.
Yes. And so fortunately, these renowned professors were wrong. Now, most people don't think it's good news when they're wrong, but I bet they were very pleased about it.
I'm very pleased. So in your version, in your studies and your theories, when is it going to be? How close are we? Scare us, please.
There was a research team headed by a Polish man, Wisław Meslowski, and they projected an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. That's based on a paper in the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences in 2012. So the problem was they used a linear projection based on relatively few data points. And the last of those data points, the last year that we had records at that time, was well below the average. So that dragged down their projection so that it hit out here. And now they have put together a 6-month ensemble forecast. So 6 months in advance, we will know with great certainty whether we're going to have an ice-free Arctic Ocean.
Okay, in 6 months. All right. And so when that happens, when the Antarctic will be completely melted, right? How quickly can we decline or risk really annihilation?
Yes. So what that means is in about 2 weeks, we will have a very good idea whether we will have an ice-free Arctic Ocean. The first week of April will tell us a lot. So the forecast that comes out in April will apply to late September. So if, for example, the first week of April, we have this forecast that says we're going to have an ice-free Arctic Ocean in September of this year. So we'll get the 6-month ensemble forecast the first week of April, which is in 10 days or 2 weeks. And it will tell us whether we're going to have an ice-free Arctic Ocean in September. If we do, then the effects will be, according to the peer-reviewed literature, the effects will be particularly profound in the northern hemisphere the following May. And that's when a whole bunch of really bad things will happen. It will become increasingly warmer. The weather will become increasingly unpredictable. So every bad thing associated with climate change will point in the direction of even worse news. And I suspect what that means is we will begin to lose habitat in even more places around the world for humans. And that's already happening in many places, especially in tropical and subtropical regions. It's just getting too hot. The precipitation patterns have changed too much. And so we're already losing the ability to live in many places. You know, many people attempt to immigrate to the United States from Central America and South America. And that's because they can no longer grow food in the place where they lived for tens or hundreds of generations. Within the same family, they can no longer grow food. And so they're getting arrested, of course, at the United States border, and probably the same thing is happening in Western Europe. There's a whole bunch of people that we didn't invite, right? Yet they showed up to the party. So the negative effects are already happening. I suspect they will accelerate beginning the May after the first ice-free Arctic Ocean. So let's say, for example, that we have an ice-free Arctic Ocean this September. Then what I expect is in the following May, we will start to see accelerating decline of habitat for humans and animals. And by the end of next year, I suspect that the same will be true all over the world.
Oh, wow. That's not fun at all. So how do you do in parties? Because it sounds like you could probably be the life of the party.
Parties? What parties? I used to be invited pretty regularly.
I wonder why.
So here's the paper that I'm drawing from. It's in Geophysical Research Letters. It's called Radiative Heating of an Ice-Free Arctic Ocean. And the key points on the upper left, the complete disappearance of Arctic sea ice would contribute to an additional solar radiative heating of 0.71 watts per meter squared to the planet. This is the equivalent to the radiative forcing of 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's the point I was trying to make. What most people don't understand is that the rate of environmental change is the most important factor allowing the continued existence of populations and species. Every species on the planet evolved through natural selection to exist in the place it's in.
We're not going to evolve that quickly.
Yes, it takes many, many generations for a new species to evolve through natural selection to survive in a particular place. And we're going to change that basically overnight.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, okay. So what are the consequences?
This is an unreplicated experiment. So we don't really know. We've never done this before, much less done this to ourselves. But I suspect it will become increasingly warm. And are you familiar with the wet bulb temperature? It is a combination of temperature and relative humidity. So as the temperature and relative humidity go up, it becomes increasingly difficult for our bodies to adapt. When I was living in Belize, I saw this in people who had been working outdoors their entire adult life. And suddenly, on a hot, humid day, they would lose the ability to walk upright. They were losing motor function and beginning to fall down. People who had hammered nails for 40 years suddenly couldn't hit the nail. Fortunately, I knew what was happening. So we'd take those people and throw them in the swimming pool, tell them to relax and spend a little time in the pool. We don't need to work during these conditions. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are not familiar with wet bulb temperatures. And so contractors working on some sites would just expect people to work their way through that. Well, that's impossible because what happens is your organs begin to fail. When you have too high of a heat and humidity, your organs begin to fail. And we were seeing early signs of organ failure when we saw people lose motor function. If we had allowed that to continue, their liver would have stopped working, their kidneys would have stopped working, and never mind heat exhaustion, which is bad enough. Right? So heat exhaustion can literally kill people, and the way it does that is through the inability to get water into the body, and therefore keeping all the motor functions operating. Water is kind of important to humans.
Absolutely. I have noticed last summer, we are in Sardinia, in the middle of the Mediterranean. We usually have a Mediterranean climate. Last year, it was so humid that I couldn't even work inside my home because my brain wouldn't work. And I've been in the Amazon, and the humidity in Sardinia was very similar to the Amazon humidity. It was definitely alarming. It's very scary. And actually, another thing that I've noticed that I'm going to ask you, because, I come from Australia where we have gum trees, gum trees, eucalyptus trees, and they used to very high temperatures, but we also have them here in Sardinia. And I've noticed last year that suddenly they all started to die, like massive death. And to me, that is incredibly scary. Could this be due to climate change? Could this be one of the many alarm bells?
Right. A professor in the Netherlands, and I won't say names because these are not public figures, she had been doing remote sensing work. So she's looking at aerial photographs and that sort of thing. And she noticed that in enormous areas, all the trees were dying quite rapidly. She noticed from 1 year of remote sensing data to the next, entire stands of forest were lost. And she's thinking, why is that? She's basically a remote sensing engineering professor. So she got to poking around in the literature. She comes across me, and she discovers that it's abrupt, irreversible climate change.
That's scary.
And you can't change the environment and expect the species that have adapted to that particular location, you can't expect to survive. You change things too fast. And you observed it when you went to Sardinia, that suddenly it was a lot different than it used to be. It's hot, it's humid, you feel it even indoors.
Another thing that I read that your theory is about, it's about nuclear power plants, because you said something very interesting about nuclear power plants. That's another thing that we have to watch out for, right?
So probably the greatest impact of nuclear power plants is how they reduce the use of fossil fuels. This actually happened in France. When was this? early 2000s. They pretty much switched overnight, very rapidly, switched from fossil fuels to nuclear power plants. And as a result, they lost what's called aerosol masking. I'll explain aerosol masking in a minute. It's the best kept secret in climate science. You won't hear this from any paid climate scientist. You won't hear this from any media personality. You won't hear this from any government figure, because it runs counter to what we are all being told to do. In any event, they switched to nuclear power plants. The aerosols fell out of the sky, and 70,000 people died from heat stroke abruptly within the first year. And that's because at the same time industrial activity through burning fossil fuels produces the greenhouse gases that we all know about, that trap the outgoing warm rays. And at the same time that industrial activity is doing that, it is also producing aerosols, these very small particles that go up into the atmosphere. And these very small particles act like mirrors or umbrellas, keeping the incoming solar radiation from striking the Earth at all. Professor James E. Hansen has pointed out in many presentations, many interviews, that all the aerosols fall out of the atmosphere in about 5 days. So the primary problem with greenhouse gases, including, for example, carbon dioxide and methane, water vapor, and 40 others that we know about, those greenhouse gases go up into the atmosphere and they act as a greenhouse. The incoming radiation heats the planet, and on the way back out, some of that long wave radiation is trapped by these greenhouse gases.
Like a microwave.
Yes, like a microwave. Or most of us have stood in a greenhouse and go from outside to inside, and suddenly, whoo, it's hot, it's humid, because they're trying to grow those plants. So the best environment is a tropical for a lot of plants, but not for us. And so at the same time as industrial activity produces those greenhouse gases that trap the heat and keep allowing the planet to heat up, we're now up above 2 degrees Celsius. But at the same time that industrial activity is producing these greenhouse gases, it is also producing these aerosols, very small particles that go up into the atmosphere and act as something of millions of mirrors or millions of little umbrellas, keeping the incoming radiation from even striking the Earth so it can't warm it up to begin with. Those aerosols are constantly being emitted into the atmosphere through our everything we do, basically, modern life. Drive a car, heat your home, almost always using fossil fuels. If you're not using fossil fuels, you're doing what I do, using a wood stove. The wood stove produces those aerosols as well. So almost everything we do to make our lives comfortable makes the planet uncomfortable. But those aerosols that go up into the atmosphere, they're keeping us cool. And when they fall out, it's really bad news. In France, they switched over very abruptly from fossil fuels as a system of running the entire country. All the heating units, all the cooling units, everything there was fossil fuels, or almost everything was fossil fuels. And then because fossil fuels are bad, they switched over quite abruptly. I think it was 2003, they switched over to nuclear power plants. And when they did, above France and the surrounding area, the aerosols that had been produced by burning fossil fuels fell out of the atmosphere. Then wet bulb temperatures were exceeded. That is, it was very hot and very humid because those aerosols fell out of the sky in the region. And so 70,000 people died because suddenly it was too hot. It's very important. And the most recent example was in shipping in the Atlantic. So there's all these shipping cargo ships. So in the Atlantic Ocean, there's a lot of cargo ships going back and forth because there's Western Europe and there's the United States and Canada. And so lots of trade is being conducted across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, very recently, I can't come up with the date, but it was within the last 5 years, the rules changed. The freighters that were going across the ocean were held to a higher standard with respect to pollution than they had been. So they stopped burning bunker fuel, what's called bunker fuel, this really dirty fuel. And it heated up in the Atlantic Ocean. And this has been reported in peer-reviewed articles over the course of the last few years. The region over the Atlantic Ocean heated up because the shipping rules changed to make the air cleaner. But you make the air cleaner, that means the aerosols fall out and it gets super hot. Same thing happened during COVID-19. First, it became warm. In some places, there was a lot more precipitation. But first, that happened in the region around Wuhan in China. Then it went to Western Europe, where suddenly there was a lot less work going on than there was before. So as a consequence, there were a lot less fossil fuels going up into the atmosphere, and therefore a lot less aerosols going to the atmosphere. And then it made its way to, well, it was in Western Europe and Northern Africa, and then it made its way to the northeastern United States, all these places where there's relatively high industry. Now, fortunately, in that situation, the impacts were only occurring in regional areas, not in the world. So it happened in the area around Wuhan, China first, and then it switched to Northern Africa and Western Europe, and then it switched to the northeastern United States, but it didn't hit all these at the same time. There are many peer-reviewed papers that have pointed out that those areas that were affected had increased temperature, increased precipitation as a result, but they were only in those regional areas. It's a mess, and it's difficult to explain because there are many things happening at the same time. Dry areas will tend to get drier, so the interior of large continents will get drier in general. Most of the planet will get wetter because a warmer planet is a wetter planet. That's been a phrase that climate scientists, people studying the climate, have noticed since the 1970s. So in the 1970s, people noticed that as it became warmer, it also became wetter.
Okay, interesting. So, one question. You're saying it's going to be a lot more humid. So, that means plants are going to thrive more. Or is that incorrect? Because you said before that with humidity, plants get better, grow better. But South America is going to not being able to produce food anymore. So, can you explain a little bit more on that?
Well, some places will dry out. The interior of large continents like North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, we're already seeing Africa, Australia, yes. So in the interior of those large continents where there's minimal impact from the ocean, that's where things are starting to dry out because the ocean currents and the ocean precipitation that always follows close to the ocean can't make it to the interior of these large continents.
So, the question is, are we fucked?
And the answer is yes, without question.
Okay, great.
Because we definitely cannot interfere with the ability of rich people to make more money. Unless people are paying attention, unless they hear about this from somebody who knows what they're talking about, they'll never know. And this is why I do the work I do. It's not because I like telling people that we are in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change. It's not that I like telling people that what this means is that we're going to lose habitat for human animals. I don't appreciate telling people that they're going to die. And as it turns out, most people don't appreciate that either. The only question is when. And based on peer-reviewed papers, I can't imagine we'll make it to 2030.
Great. No wanted to age. So I guess that's it.
And that's the best case scenario. Warming of the planet is occurring so rapidly that we're going to lose habitat for our species and therefore almost question for all species on Earth by 2030.
That's pretty scary.
Things are just warming up too fast.
So how can we live knowing this? How can we continue living as we can really survive it?
Well, first of all, everybody dies. Every living thing dies. And we all know that, right? We know that until we're about 12 years old. And it's really interesting because children are living in the moment better than any of us adults, right? We adults have so much important things going on in our lives. We have to work, we have to make enough money to buy groceries, we have to feed ourselves, we have to keep the tap water on, we have to do all these things. And we lose sight of the fact that we're going to die. Children live in the moment. They're like from one moment they'll fall down, they'll scratch their knee, they'll be crying like crazy, and then 30 seconds later, they stand up and they're playing with other children. We don't do that. If I scrape my knee, I'm going to the hospital. I'm telling the world that my knee is scraped. It's a big deal. I mean, that's how most people are, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So again, I recommend living with intention, living urgently with death in mind, because the wolf is always at the door, right? Could die any minute. In fact, Homer wrote in the Iliad that any moment could be our last. And he was pointing out this is why the gods envy us. The gods envy us, mortal humans, because we have the capacity to live in the moment. Our lives are short compared to the gods, right? The gods, if you live forever, would you ever stop to sniff a flower? And if so, why? You have millions of years worth of flower sniffing left in your life. Why would you bother? So we mortal humans have the capacity to live in the moment.
That's very profound.
And some of us do and some of us don't. When I was on a speaking tour in Western Europe, and this goes back to, I think, 2015, I was speaking about this very topic to middle school and high school students. And it's a pretty dire message. But at that age, people still are capable of understanding that their lives are short. And so after I gave this presentation, I'm staying after the presentation and talking with people, answering their individual questions, having these really riveting conversations. And then 2 or 3 of the students walk by, but they're not walking. They're skipping like they're children. They're skipping like they're children with smiles on their faces because somebody had the audacity to tell them the truth. Everybody knows at some level that we are overheating the planet, right? I mean, you would have to be living in a casket for the last 50 years to not know that we're overheating the planet. And they understood. And now they were going to live with intention. Now they were going to live grateful for the time they have. When I was on that tour, the world's oldest human being turned 117 years old. And at her 117th birthday party, she was asked, what is that like? What is it like to live to 117 years? And she said, it seemed rather short.
I love that.
She was 117 years old. It seemed rather short. Because if you take advantage of every day, if you take advantage of every moment, if you live fully with intention, I suspect we're going to feel the same way, no matter when we die.
So when I feel miserable, can I give you a call and you remind me of this?
Of course. So my bottom line, as we're wrapping this up, live large. Be you. Be the best you that you've ever been. Live as though you're dying. The day draws near. We don't know when it will be. It would be very convenient. I think knowing our birthday is far less important than knowing our death day, but we don't get to know that one. So we have to live each day with intention, live with meaning, live with love for others. Why would we not do that anyway? Well, here's a line you can use on other people. People ask me if I'm depressed. They ask me this all the time. Almost everybody I meet for the first time says, aren't you depressed? And I say, no, I'm a carrier. I'm a carrier of depression. I don't have it. I just transmit it to other people. Like being a carrier for a lethal disease.
You are the most depressing motivational speaker.
No. The 117-year-old woman said it seemed rather short. So take advantage. Live every day.
It's very profound what you said. And everybody should actually listen to that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. There's another example that serves as something that's pretty close to what we're going through. Until about 1970, the medical community, the doctors, ethicists, everybody involved in the medical community, thought it was perfectly fine to not tell people when they had a terminal condition. So I know with great certainty, based on the evidence I have found for person A, that person A is going to die sometime between 6 months and 12 months from now. They never told anybody. They kept it to themselves until about 1970. In 1970, there was this, suddenly a bunch of ethicists went, wait a minute, these people are going to die. All of them are going to die. We know this because everybody who's ever had this condition died within 6 weeks. Maybe we should tell them. It's the same thing. Loss of habitat for human animals means that we're going to die, and I'm trying to put some numbers on when that might happen. That's all. That doesn't make me the bad person.
I still remember when I was doing my master in anthropology and international development, my professor of climate change was saying that climate change is like we are inside a car going at 200 miles an hour towards a wall and nobody's pressing the brakes. And that stuck with me. And it was like, that's how it is. It's really that.
It's way worse than that. It's way worse than that. Not only are we not pressing the brakes, we're looking around, partying like crazy, drinking alcohol, and we got the accelerator pushed all the way down. Pedal to the metal, baby.
On that note, let's close here. Thank you so much, Professor. It's been incredibly interesting and depressing, and at the same time exhilarating. Hopefully, I'll live the rest of my days a little bit better. But yeah, thank you so much, Professor. Really appreciate you being with us. Thank you, and be in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And that's a wrap on another thought-provoking episode of Are We Fucked? How to Survive a Climate Shit Show. Brought to you by Against the Tide Films. I want to extend a huge thank you to our guest today, Guy McPherson, for joining us and sharing his invaluable insights. If you're intrigued by Guy's theories and want to delve deeper into the world of abrupt climate change and near-term human extinction, be sure to visit his website at guymcpherson.com. There you'll find a wealth of resources, including articles, scientific studies, and more, to satisfy your curiosity and expand your understanding. We hope today's conversation has sparked some thought-provoking discussions and inspire you to take action in your own life and community. Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can face the challenges of climate change with courage and resilience. Before we sign off, I want to remind you that Are We Fucked is Against the Tide Film production. For more information about our podcast and upcoming episodes, visit us at againstthetideFilms.com. Thank you for tuning in, Climate Warriors. Until next time, stay tuned, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep fighting the good fight. This is your host, Lisa Camillo, signing off. Take care, and remember, the future is in our hands.